Aloha, I'm Eva Andrade. I'm the president and CEO of Hawaii Family Forum. And today we're going to look at voting in Hawaii, the new voting in Hawaii, where you get your ballot in the mail. And we're going to talk about blank votes. So let's chat about that. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited about today's show because I think that there's a conversation that's not taking place with the new voting system here in Hawaii. And I'd like to introduce you to someone I've known and worked with for probably 20 years, and that is local attorney Fritz Rohlfing. Fritz, welcome today.
Thank you, Eva. It's good to be with you.
Do you want to share a little bit background? I know your dad has some history in politics, and that kind of ties everything together. And just as a disclaimer, Fritz is a member of the Republican Party, so I just want to put that out there. Go ahead, Fritz.
Right. I'm born and raised in Hawaii. My dad is Fred Rohlfing, and he was first elected to state office in 1959 in the first state legislature.
Yes, before I was born.
I wish I could say it was before I was born, but it was a little after. And so he continued in politics in the state legislature from 1959 up until 1976, and then he ran for Congress twice in 1972 and 1976. He had close elections, but he lost both times. And then he went back into the state legislature, I think it was in 1978, and was there until 1984. So we've been through a lot of elections in our own family, and that is what piqued my curiosity and interest in campaigning and politics and elections, and that's a major interest that I have. I'm an attorney, so I practice law as my profession, but I guess you could say my avocation is political campaigning and elections. It's an area of endless fascination, and it's really enjoyable to understand that process.
Okay, so this is actually fascinating. So, like, I knew that about you. So as our viewers are watching this, you grew up in a home who had a dad who was running for office, so you know what it's like behind the scenes when your parent is out there trying to put on the good face, you know, the sign waving and all of that.
Right.
How different is that from the way that you saw it growing up and the way that you're seeing it today?
You see it when it's, you know, in your life and it's personal. Obviously you see it from a more personal perspective and what you need to do and what you shouldn't do, and you know, the personal feelings and expressions that people have. So I hope that I have a little more objective perspective, obviously, with a lot of time. But you still have to. You still remember and engage in that personal aspect of the entire process.
Is it more nasty, though, today than it was before in the way that they come after a political candidate?
It is. It's more frequently harsh and nasty and negative. But there were a lot of times when it was negative back in the day as well. Don't let anybody fool you that there was some idyllic time in politics.
Okay, well, that's a good way to kind of segue into the meat of what we're going to talk about today.
Right.
And it's really interesting because with the new voting system here in the state, now everybody who's registered to vote, they get their ballot in the mail, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's talk about voting in Hawaii and the statistics since statehood. So when Hawaii became a state, we had like a 90-something% turnout for the elections.
Right.
Now that's great, and it's understandable. People were excited about statehood, but you fast forward to 2016, and the numbers were still quite dismal.
Right.
Why do you think that is here in Hawaii?
As you said, clearly when Hawaii achieved statehood, people were very excited about the potential and the opportunity that they had to elect Congress people and U.S. senators, and to Washington, who are not just a delegate, you know, like Jonah Kuhio and Farrington, but they could actually vote in the House of Representatives and have senators. And so it was kind of like an empowerment that now Hawaii had representation that could vote. We had we had 4 electors that came from Hawaii, and one of the things that I didn't know at the time, but I later realized or learned was in 1960, the vote between Vice President Nixon and Senator John Kennedy was just a matter of a few hundred votes separating them. Kennedy won Hawaii in 1960.
Now that's important too, because we do want to remind voters that your vote does count. So I know some people think, well, I'm just one vote. One vote doesn't make a difference. But you're saying this particular race was very close,
that
right?
Election,
just a few hundred.
For president, just a few hundred votes. Either way, Hawaii could have gone to Nixon. I mean, and that also shows how competitive the parties were at the time. But as time has gone on, I think there's 2 factors. I think people have started to take it for granted that our rights as voters and to elect representatives. And at the same time, Hawaii has become more and more a one-party state.
Right.
And so when there's less competition, there's less interest, because people feel on either side that, as you say, their vote doesn't count, because if they're for the minority party, there's no chance they're going to win, and if they're for the majority party, their vote isn't really needed because their party will continue to dominate politics. So I think those 2 factors, taking things for granted, and as time has gone on, more and more domination from one party has tended to dampen enthusiasm for actually voting.
So in 2016, our legislators decided that they wanted to fix this problem of Hawaii being on the bottom of the list, the lowest in the nation at voter registration and turnout. And so they established that you could register to vote all the way up until the day of election, right? So you can go into the voter service centers and you can register to vote, and you can go ahead and vote that same day all the way up until November 3rd. So that's a good thing that our legislators did, because they wanted to increase voter participation, right?
Right.
So you're a numbers man, and I think it would be great for us to really have a discussion about what really happened. So as we saw in the news, everybody was excited that more people voted. It was historical. This was great. But you took a look at the numbers, and tell us what you saw.
Well, let me just back up a little. I mean, along with that expanded opportunity to register to vote, right? You can register the day of the election. We went to an all-mail ballot for the first time this year, 2020. Way back when my dad was running actively, you could get an absentee ballot, which meant they would mail you your ballot, but there had to be a reason that you gave for getting that absentee ballot, that you weren't going to be there, you're a first responder, you have to work on election day, you couldn't do it. You had to have some reason. I don't know how, they didn't call you up and send somebody to your house to ask you, interrogate you, but it was kind of the exception and not the rule. Most people went to their precincts, and that's when you had the high voter turnout.
In the past, there was a pride in voting, right?
Absolutely.
I
There's
remember
a civic pride.
My parents, when they would vote, they would go stand in the lines, and there'd be lines, and there'd be a little frustration that they had to be in the lines. But there was something satisfying about going into the voting booth, making your selection, and coming out.
Right.
Have we lost that, do you think, with the mail ballots?
We were losing it just because of the lower turnout.
Right.
And the idea was, if we do an all-mail ballot, we will increase turnout. Now, that didn't seem to make sense, right? Intuitively, we went to a kind of a no-fault absentee ballot system, basically. You could get a mail-in ballot for any reason at all. You didn't have to say you weren't going to be around or whatever. And so for I think probably 20 years or so, we've had a system where anybody who wanted a mail ballot could get it. About half the voters who participated actually did get that mail ballot. So those numbers were going up, and I think some people felt if we just have everybody mail in their ballot, maybe we can get a higher turnout. It became difficult, and again, this is kind of a fall off, decline of community participation. I think the Office of Elections actually was having trouble filling all the volunteer slots to man the precincts, for an entire day on election day, so people could come in and vote. And so, the jury was out. One of the problems with the mail-in, and I'm sure you've heard about it in the national media, is you're just mailing to everybody. So you don't know if they really wanted that mail-in ballot.
If they still live there, they're still alive.
Right. And so there's some risks in terms of mailing things to people that didn't ask and may not be there at all anymore. But there's certain precautions that can be taken. One of them is the voting office, the Office of Elections, and the counties that are actually matching signatures. So they're trying to make sure that the people that are sending ballots in are actually the people that had registered to vote.
What do you think, speaking about that particular point, there are people that are very concerned about having a signature in the mail out there for everybody to see, right? So anybody who saw that in transit has now my legal signature that they could take a photo of. I mean, unfortunately, we live in a society where identities are stolen all the time. So it's not like people are just making this fear up. It actually comes from a real place.
Sure. And I think that's a legitimate concern. And I just mailed my ballot in the other day, and I mentioned it to one of my coworkers, and she said, I'm going to drop my ballot off because I don't want my signature out in the public. Now, how public is it really? If you actually physically put it in the mailbox, the postal workers will see it, and the election workers will see it. But how many other people are going to have access to it? I don't think it's a high risk, but it is of concern. I understand.
Unless you're in a state where they find a bag of ballots. I mean, unfortunately, we have to be honest that there are problems we're seeing across the nation on this particular thing. But in any case, our legislators thought that this would encourage more people to participate. So the numbers did go up, right?
Well, they did, and there's also another factor in that, of course, and that is many of us have been locked at home for months with the pandemic lockdowns or stay-at-home orders. So I think that helped encourage people to say, this is actually something I can participate in, out in it that has an impact on my community, and so I want to participate. And so it turned out to be a good thing in terms of participation, at least this time around.
And that's what we saw in all the news reports. People were very excited about the higher number. Yes, historical. All the headlines screamed that there were more participation in the primary than in history. There were people across all of our news channels excited about this, but not one channel or news reporter that I saw talked about the issue of blank votes. And there was an astronomical rise in blank votes. And so, Fritz, tell us about this particular thing, because it's a huge thing.
Well, blank votes they've always been there. I mean, there's always a blank vote factor. And what a blank vote is, let's just be clear on what that means, is you get your ballot and people vote in the different races. But if somebody decides not to vote in a particular race, say you vote in the mayor's race, but then you drop down, and these are city and county nonpartisan elections, you drop down and the next one is the office of the prosecutor, the prosecuting attorney. And you say, I don't know them very well, I just will leave it blank, I'm not going to vote for either one. That's a blank vote, and it actually gets tallied by the elections office. So they'll say how many people voted for, let's say in the prosecutor's race, how many people voted for Steve Alm, how many people voted for Megan Cowell, how many voted for Jacqueline Esser, and how many people didn't vote for any of them.
I think what's important for our viewers to understand is, so you have eligible voters, right? And we've talked about this on the show before. You have people that are eligible to vote in the state of Hawaii, right? You have to be 18, you have to be a resident. Then you have the registered voters.
Right.
And then you have the voter turnout, right?
Right.
So
the registered voters who actually do vote.
Who actually do vote.
Right.
And then you have the person who wins the election and they get X amount of votes. So sometimes, and in one of the congressional leaders that we have in office right now, when you look at the actual vote that put this person into office, it was less than 40% of when you're taking eligible voters,
right.
Which means when you think about that 60% of the state did not say that this would be the good representative for the state.
Right.
So,
but that's the rules. So that's how they get elected, right?
Yeah, and the other thing that we want to make sure that the viewers understand is that in Hawaii, you have to pick a party in the primary. Right. So you get your ballot and you have to say, okay, I'm going to vote Republican or I'm going to vote Democrat, and you have to stick to that in the primary. It doesn't work that way in the general. But the reason I want to talk about that is because I saw an email that went out saying that it was the highest Republican turnout in history, which is a good thing.
For a primary.
Because people have to pick. I mean, they have to identify a party. But what did you notice when you were looking at the numbers?
Well, as you said, if you're going to vote in the partisan election side, now there's a nonpartisan side, so you could theoretically just vote on the nonpartisan ballot for city and county office and not even flip the ballot over. But if you want to flip it over and you want to vote for some of the people, you do have to choose one party or the other. It's, in a sense, it's secret. In the old days, 40 years ago, you had to declare to the people at the, manning the booths or manning the precinct office which ballot you wanted. And it was noted down and it was public information, at least it was on your voter roll. But now you do have anonymity in a sense that you don't have to say what if you're one or the other, but you do have to vote on one.
Right.
And so we get the results, we see what comes back. And we saw, I saw when I measured it in the 1st congressional district, which is most of Oahu, that the number of people who selected a Republican ballot in the primary was almost up threefold, which is very unusual. And what that basically says, it doesn't mean Hawaii is becoming Republican. It just means that people who are Republican decided to vote in the primary and most often in previous years, they just let it go and didn't even bother because there weren't any competitive races in the Republican side of the ballot. So it didn't make sense to them to actually come out and vote. But we can tell from the votes in the nonpartisan races which race really animated people and which races they didn't know, they didn't have a viewpoint, and they would leave their ballot blank even in those nonpartisan races.
And in that analysis, it looked like that it was the choice of mayor on Oahu that really energized a lot of people,
exactly.
Right?
It was the mayor's race because you had a number of very competitive candidates. They were well known, so people got to know who they were. They could find out about them online, social media, in the newspaper, mail in. People were getting a lot of information about the mayor's race, and so people made a decision, and almost all the voters did decide between one of the candidates. Only 1% left the mayor's race blank. So this is the race that people were focused on. They had an idea of who they wanted to vote for. They understood what they wanted to do, and they did it.
But that didn't trickle down into the districts.
Well, it didn't do it in the districts, but even in the other nonpartisan city races, in the prosecuting attorney's office, you had 3 candidates actively campaigning, the top 3, who I mentioned earlier. But even there, 13% of the ballots, 13% of the people who voted did not select one of those candidates for prosecutor. They left their ballot blank. So that tells you that there's still a lot of uncertainty, among those people. But
and you make a good point, because if in the mayor's race they knew, right? Because I just want to say that because of the pandemic, there really was a good effort to get information on the mayoral candidates out there.
Yes.
And a lot of them took ownership, and there were some really good ads for all of the mayoral candidates. I saw some really good publicity that was put out. So I think that
you also had debates.
And debates.
So, radio, TV.
Although it's like, it's always amusing to me that if you've got 12 candidates for mayor, they should let all 12 participate in a debate. It drives me crazy that they decide who the top whatever is, and then that's the only ones you hear, because unfortunately, some of the candidates that didn't make it into the top may have been a good mayor, but maybe they didn't have the same opportunity to debate. But let's just say that they did do a better job this time of getting information out. But that didn't translate into the prosecutor's race. And it definitely didn't happen. When I looked at the numbers in both the House and the Senate, I was shocked at how many blank votes were left. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So what you're talking about is on the partisan, essentially on the partisan side of the ballot, where you had to choose a party. And people were pretty competent or could figure out if they knew one of the people running for the state or for the U.S. House, say. If you chose the Democratic ballot in the 1st Congressional District, I think Ed Case was the only one running. Or if you chose the Republican ballot, there were several people that were.
And what does I'm sorry, it's like I get excited about this, so please forgive me, people. But when you think about this, okay, so you're the only one on the ballot, and there's blank votes. What does that mean? I mean, how do you read that, right?
And that is the big question, right? A blank ballot is essentially where you only have one candidate, and most people just fill in the box, right, for that candidate, especially if that's a well-known incumbent running and they're the only candidate on the ballot. But if you don't fill in the ballot for that person, I view that as basically either a no confidence or I don't know who you are, and so I don't feel good about filling in and agreeing that you're the best person, even though if that person just gets one vote, they've won.
They won. So do you think they care? So, I'm the incumbent, I'm the only one on the ticket. There are 60% blank votes and 40% vote for me. They select it, I win. Should I care? I guess I should care about the 60% that have a no confidence. But do you think, honestly, they care?
Yes, I think they do care. It sends a signal, and so they do care. Now, if they're the only candidate running in any party, right? If there's only a Democrat who's running for that seat, and there's no Republican running, or any other third party running, Libertarian or whatever, then you care less, right? Because as long as you get through that primary, you win. As soon as you're nominated as the party's nominee, you're the winner. And so, yes, you're concerned about the number of people that didn't vote for you, but you just kind of note that down and say, maybe I need to do a better job of getting my name out there. But if you know you're going to have a competitor that's going to come from another party, and your blank ballot numbers are high, that's
when you need to really worry.
Time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that because either those voters are saying, I'm in your party, but I'm not for you, and that's a concern for anybody in either party. Either I don't know you or I don't really like you.
And I think that's very scary. And as we start, we always run out of time on these conversations, which always drive me a little crazy. But give us some actual, there's two things I want you to cover. Give us some actual numbers of blank votes on both the Democratic side and the Republican side. And then I want you to take us out on what does a blank vote really mean, and when is it okay to leave a blank vote, and when do you think someone should make a choice, even if you have to pick between Satan and the Antichrist, the lesser of two evils. So give us some numbers.
Yeah, let's look at that, and I'm referencing a chart that you prepared.
Painstakingly, I must add.
And which I'm very grateful for. And you went through each of the senatorial districts and representative districts. So people running for state representative, that's partisan. So if you're running, you have to choose which party you're running in. And when you're a voter, you have to choose a party to vote for that state representative, and you have to vote in that same party if there's a state senate race or a congressional race. That's all in your party. So could take a couple of examples. If you take House District 17, that's basically Hawaii Kai. And
is this House or Senate?
You got the House, yeah. Okay. And you had in the Democratic primary, so people that chose the Democratic ballot and they were voting in the first congressional race and any other in a state senate race that covered the Hawaii Kai area. But people voting in the House, there was somebody running in the Democratic Party for State House. I think there's only one. But over 49% of the voters who voted in the Democratic primary did not fill in the ballot box for that particular candidate.
Wow. If
you go over in that same district in Hawaii Kai, if you go over to the Republican side of the ballot, there's only one person running, an incumbent legislator, and there was an 11% blank there. Well, that's good for that person running, because that tells you within his own party, he's well known and he's liked enough so that 89% of the voters said, that's my guy, I'm voting for him. But what it tells you on the Democratic side is, in this particular district, what that likely tells you is there are a lot of people that choose the Democratic ballot in that district that probably are planning on voting for the Republican candidate when they get to the general election, because he's better known, he's been out there a long time, they like what he does or whatever. And there also may be a factor is they just don't know who this candidate is. It's a new person, it's a challenger, challenging a long-term incumbent. And so these folks just leave it blank, either because they don't know him or they decide, I'm going to vote for the other guy later, so I don't even want to, I don't want to even vote for this person.
So it seems to me like both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party need to do a better job of getting information out about their candidates to people in the district so that you can vote. In this case that you gave, obviously they kind of know him, but right. There are cases where they need to get out there more and let people know about the candidate.
That's true, but it does really fall on the candidate themselves. Number one, because the party, if there's a competitive primary, the party really shouldn't be getting involved in saying, hey, we like this person best and make sure you vote for them in the primary.
Although you kind of do see that with money. Right? They might put money more in one campaign than another.
Yeah, and what is a party, right? Yeah. There's a formal party structure. I was formerly the chair of the Hawaii Republican Party, and there's informal party, meaning people who are donors, people who support, people who go out and hold signs. They may not even be on the party's, have signed up a party card and be in the party officially, but they tend to be in that party.
Okay, so. Well, we are definitely at the end of the program, but in this last couple of seconds, tell people when it's okay to leave it blank and when you think that they should make a choice between Satan and the Antichrist.
The example that I just gave, where somebody decides, I'm going to choose this party in the primary because I like their candidates or there's a particular candidate I want to support. To me, it seems like, and for the reason that I told you, if they're thinking they're probably going to vote for the opposing party's candidate come the general election, I don't think it's such a bad thing. If you don't feel strongly that you want to support the candidate of the party that you've chosen the ballot for, I think it's okay. I mean, and it also gives them a message that they really need to work harder to get your vote, right? Where I think is a mistake is for people, especially when you get to the general election, just because you don't know them really well or have a strong feeling about who you want to vote for, that is not a good reason to leave it blank. You need to do your very best to figure out who is the best candidate. And if you think one candidate is just a little bit better than the other, you ought to vote. Because if you don't, you have no say. And it's other people that will be deciding that question for you. And unless you're completely indifferent between the two, and it's hard to imagine, how can you be indifferent totally among two different people or three different people that you know? You probably think, well, each of them has their weaknesses and strengths, but if I got to hire somebody, I'm hiring this person.
You've heard it on the show today. Make sure that you use your voice and you vote. So get out there and do it. We'll see you at the polls. Mahalo, everybody.
Mahalo.
If you liked today's video, make sure that you like it, that you share it with your friends, that you subscribe, and then hit that notification button so you'll know every time we upload a new video. Mahalo, everybody.